Hey guys, thank you so much for checking out my first video discussing what should be considered the first video game. And with your help, we've concluded with 47% of the vote that Tennis for Two is the very first video game. But where do we go from here? Well, you see, there's a lot more video game history to be discussed, and we're going to continue discussing it right here with the rest of the first season of VG 101. Hope you guys stick around, and I hope you guys check it out. Good morning, class. I'm sorry I don't look as professional as I did the last time we met, but I wanted to dress a little more comfortable, because even though this is only our second class together, I think it's about time that we took a field trip. This field trip is going to be one like no other, as we're driving and flying cross-country so that we can play one of the most influential video games of all time, Spacewar. Spacewar was developed in 1962 by computer scientists at MIT for the newly installed PDP-1 computer. The popularity that Spacewar had amongst programmers inspired ports of the game at different colleges and helped to inspire those who would later on seek to cash in on the popularity of playing a game on a screen. We have made it to our destination, Mountain View, California, and if you look behind me, we'll be taking a look inside the Computer History Museum to talk to a man who has something to say about the PDP-1 computer and the video game Spacewar. We are here today with a man who could be considered one of the founding fathers of video games, the man who made Spacewar, Mr. Steve Russell. Steve, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, when we were talking earlier, you had a slight objection to founding father of video game. Would you like to talk about that a little bit?
Well, when Spacewar was written, there was no notion of video games. And in fact, it was about 10 years later that computers and displays got cheap enough so that they could be considered to be put in an arcade, and eventually people did. And then the idea of calling them video games came up because they were all using video monitors, which Spacewar never knew about.
So with that being said, what would you consider Spacewar? Because it is a game.
A computer game.
Could you tell us a little bit about how the PDP-1 works?
The PDP-1 was the first computer that I ever met that had a display on it as a standard feature and had a power switch that I could touch. I had been working for several years on the big IBM systems, which at the time were vacuum tube. They were just beginning to be transistorized. But here the PDP-1 had a typewriter right there connected, and very, very soon after it arrived, a committee of students had made an interactive system that allowed you to debug your program in terms of the symbols you had used for writing it rather than just raw numbers. And the combination of doing that and doing it on a typewriter which responded instantly seemed like much more exciting thing to do than sit there and decode large volumes of numbers. So I kind of wanted to use that, and it looked like with the display you could do something interesting. The space race was very much in the news at the time, and so we decided that, I decided and promoted the idea that, you could probably write a spaceship trainer for it. So somebody ought to write something to train people how to fly a spaceship. And they could do it on this computer, and it would be fun. The part that I did was what I would consider a plain vanilla programming project. There were a couple of things that were needed to be collected beforehand. One was I needed sine and cosine routines and square root routine. And I didn't have to write them, they were available. And in fact, the sine-cosine routine was the cause of some of the embarrassment, because I was ceremonially presented with the sine and cosine routines by Ellen Kotok, who said, here's the sine and cosine routines, now what's your excuse? I didn't have one, so I had to write some code, and I had to figure out how to display spaceships that rotated smoothly.
How was Spacewar received whenever
You had finished it and people were able to play it. Did people enjoy it?
Spacewar was probably one of the first computer games where people actually came back to play it again. Because a lot of the earlier ones were demonstrations, but oh, that's nice. But, you know, tic-tac-toe doesn't have a high repeat value. We did bias things a little in favor of tactics rather than just shoot 'em up. So there's a real benefit to understanding something about orbits and something about strategy, like not wasting your fuel in torpedoes when your opponent isn't a good target. And so there are some things to figure out, and there are some things to practice.
So now that we've talked about how Spacewar is played, I just want to let you know that I've actually never played it. I've never done any kind of emulation of it, never played it in a web browser. So with that being said, would you mind playing me in a game of Spacewar?
Good luck.
All right, so here we go. My first time playing Spacewar with Mr. Steve Russell.
Russell was right when he said that the focus of this game was more about tactics rather than shoot 'em up. I'd have to keep my wits about me in order to survive. Each player controls a ship that is gravitating towards a star. The version that Russell and I are playing, if you touch the star, you'll randomly warp to another location on the screen. But in some parts of the game, the star will make your ship explode. The main controls are rotating your ship clockwise and counterclockwise, using your thrust to propel your ship in the direction you're facing, and firing your torpedo to try and hit the other player. While the main goal may be to blow up the other player's ship, you can put yourself at a major disadvantage by just firing off torpedoes at will, as there's only a certain amount you can shoot each round. There's also the hyperspace button, which will teleport your ship to somewhere else on the screen. It could be helpful in a bind, but with each time you use it, your chances of your ship randomly exploding increase. Orbit is also a major tactical point to get the hang of, as you can, depending on your entry to the star's gravitational pull, use the star's gravity to propel you in a given direction. While this game is incredibly tactics-based and has a learning curve, for myself that learning curve was losing to Russell, you can get the hang of it. By the end of our session, I had even beaten Russell a few times at his own game. But in the end, it isn't about who's more tactically capable than the other. It's about learning how to fly a spaceship, and that's the whole reason Russell invented this game in the first place. And thanks to Spacewar, I've learned way more about flying a spaceship than I ever would have. I hope you learned something too, and I can't wait to explore more with you next time, right here on VG 101.